First, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Boise, and back in the early 90s, 1992, my wife and I and our 4 sons went to become missionaries in Albania, just coming out of communism. Tried to make its country the first atheistic state. So it was a country wide open and knew nothing about God or anything, and we worked and ministered there, training up Albanians to mentor them to take over the church, because we knew from the beginning the only way the Albanian church would succeed is if we trained up Albanians to take it in their culture and language the way they do. And so while we were there is when the war in Kosovo happened. Kosovo used to be part of Albania, but then after World War II they carved that off and gave it to Tito in Serbia, because they had a lot of agriculture and gold mines and things like that, and he wanted it. But 90% Albanian. And so there had been a lot of genocide committed over there over the years, erupted into a war. And then in 2000, after the war was settled and the Serbs pulled back, 98% of the Albanian Muslims who lived there were able to repatriate back to their country. And just saw horrible situations. And then in the last 2 years, we worked at the Athens Refugee Center in Athens, Greece. So in 2002, as we worked our way out of jobs and trained up people underneath us, we returned to Boise to attend my second son's graduation from college, and a gal at our church that had been supporting us all those years overseas said, "Mark, if you're going to be here for a while, you ought to come down. I work at World Relief. You ought to come down with all your overseas refugee experience and see what you can do to volunteer." So I went down to see what volunteer opportunities were there, and they had me hired before I left that day. So thus, that was 14 years ago. And my wife went back to school, got a federal degree in education, so our plans were to go back overseas and work like an international school, but by the time she graduated, we believed that we were doing mission work right here. And so World Relief offered me the opportunity to be the state director of their operations in North Carolina. So we moved to North Carolina for a few years, and then the director here in Spokane in 2010 retired as well after 28 years of running the World Relief office here. And said, "Hey, Mark, if you want to move back to the Northwest, this is a great place to work and to be." And so it was a really easy decision because our parents lived in Northwest, our kids were settled here, so it was an easy decision to move back. And we've been here for 6 years and absolutely love it in Spokane. So that's a real quick snapshot of my history. But let's talk about World Relief here. Can you hit the forward button to kind of open that up? There we go. Yeah, much better. All right. So, like your pastor said, our mission statement is to empower the local church to serve the most vulnerable. What does that look like? Well, internationally, World Relief is an international humanitarian organization. We started out as the humanitarian arm of the National Association of Evangelicals 70 years ago, providing humanitarian aid to war-torn Europe. We've kind of come out from that covering right now, but we're independent. We're not tied to any denomination, but we're very much Christian in focus. And one of the things we do internationally is disaster relief. So if there's an earthquake in Nepal or a tsunami in Indonesia, we're one of those organizations that come in and brings in supplies and training for those suffering from a disaster. But what makes World Relief unique is that we go in and we train and we work through the local church. We train the local church to be able to supply and meet the needs of those affected by disaster, give them the practical means and the supplies necessary, so that the people in the community are seeing that the local church is the agent of change for their lives. We also, in a lot of third world countries, have like mother and child health clinics and agricultural development, peace-building initiatives, where in a lot of third world countries in Africa and Southeast Asia, we bring in people from the church, from the bush or from the jungle. We train them up, and then they go back out into their communities and provide additional training, again, to be able to be transformational in their own communities. We even in a few third world countries, poorest of poor countries, we have micro-enterprise loans. So mainly women can take out small loans to start cottage industries, so they have viable employment options for them and their children. So everywhere we work around the world, we work through the local church. Here in the United States, we have 28 offices whereby we primarily do refugee resettlement. We're one of 9 nonprofits contracted with our Department of State to provide resettlement services to refugees who are invited to immigrate permanently to this country. We do not bring them here. We don't choose who comes here, but we're the agency here in Spokane that welcomes them nearly every week at the Spokane airport and helps them get settled and helps get their lives put together to become self-sufficient. What makes World Relief unique is that we're the only one out of the 9 that is evangelical in nature and be able to empower. We look for our volunteers from local churches. So this is a great opportunity for us to be here today and to be able to share with you all. So let's talk a little bit about refugees. If you want to advance to the next slide, what comes to mind? We're going to do a little bit interactive here. What comes to mind when you hear the word refugee? A couple of people say 1 or 2 words that comes to mind. Foreigner, okay? Poor. From a war-torn, what did you say? Country. From a war-torn country. Somebody else said something? Destitute. Well, actually, the term, those are all good, but the term refugee has a very narrow definition. Next slide. Actually, the definition is someone who's been forced to flee their country of nationality due to persecution. That's the key word there, persecution. Persecution because of their race, because of their religion, because of their nationality, or their membership in a particular social group or political opinion. And due to a well-founded fear, they're unable to return to their country and nationality. So what does that mean practically? That means that their country they're born into doesn't deem them worthy enough to protect them from human rights abuses, protect them from severe persecution, life-threatening, so that they're at the point where they feel like the only way to live, the only way to survive is to leave their beloved country and cross an international boundary and escape from it. And they have a well-founded fear that they can't return because their country still will not protect them from persecution. Now, I want you to notice on this definition that there's nothing there about natural disaster. There's nothing there about economic problems. Nothing there about going to another country to set up a business or something. It's due only to persecution. Now, there's a lot of people that are persecuted within their country and they have to be relocated within their country, and they're called, of all things, internally displaced people. But a refugee is someone who's actually had to, in most cases, flee their country altogether and move to a foreign country in order to survive. And they really have no choice to survive but to do that. So, as a point of contrast, an immigrant to another country is someone who chooses to relocate, sometimes because of economic or education or family reasons. They have a choice in the matter. Whereas a refugee is someone who really has no choice but to flee their country. Next screen. So what causes refugees in the world today? Sometimes it is because of war. We received a number of Iraqi refugees in Spokane over the last few years. And many of them will tell me harrowing tales of how they may get a note under the door one day saying, you're on the wrong side of the political or you're on the wrong side of the religious equation in our city, and unless you pay us a heavy ransom, we're going to burn down your house. We're going to kidnap your daughter. You know, in Iraq, you take those threats very seriously. What would you do? Probably the same thing as this man. He gathers up his kids, his wife, and his parents, and he flees for a place of safety, which generally means leaving the country altogether. Next screen. Sometimes it's because of ethnic cleansing. For those that may be following international news, there's a huge ethnic cleansing happening in Burundi right now. And so consequently, these people who are Hutu in their ethnic group are being persecuted by the Tutsis who took over the government, and because of political strife, are murdering anybody that's a Hutu. They're taking out their machetes, they're chasing them down, they're burning down their homes, they're killing them. Kind of like what happened in Rwanda a decade ago, 2 decades ago. And so consequently, just like you would do, they flee in order to save their lives. They pack everything on their back, and as you can see back in the jungle, they're fleeing to go to a place of safety, which generally means a refugee camp in another country. Next one. Sometimes it's because of human trafficking. Did you know that Burma has the highest incident of child soldiering of any other country in the world? And so the communists who took over Burma, changed its name to Myanmar, have been persecuting those who helped support the overflow of the Japanese occupation during World War II, which is generally the Karen people or the Chin people on either side of the country of Burma. And the Karen are largely a Christian ethnic group. Our American missionary, Adoniram Judson, a century and a half ago, went into the country to preach the gospel to the Burmese. Karen. And the Karen had a long folk tales that say that we have lost our way to God. And that one day, a white-skinned man will come and open up a banana leaf to be able to preach the gospel and showing us the way back to God. And a banana leaf looks like the pages of a book. And so here come Adonai and Jetson, unknown about this folktale, and goes to the Kren people and opens up his Bible and starts talking about a way back to God. And the people came in, just hundreds and thousands of the Kren people were converted because this was an answer. Finally, the answer came of how we can get right with God. So they're mainly a Christian people, but severely persecuted. And so when the military comes marching on these villages, they will forcibly conscript the children into the army to carry their heavy backpacks or to be minesweepers in fields that are left over from World War II. So if you were a mother with some children and you heard the military was marching on your village, you'd probably do like hundreds of thousands of them. And they hide out in the jungle. And they try to make their way to a place of safety, which generally means going to Thailand or Malaysia, escaping their country altogether. And sometimes it's just simply because of persecution. This picture was taken at the Yamuk refugee camp a few months ago. This is a city that, think downtown Spokane 5 years ago. Very modern. But because of the war in Syria, it's been reduced to rubble. People have no food, they have no water, and a humanitarian organization got the government's approval to bring in food and water supplies. The NBC reporter that took this picture reports that as soon as they announced that they had free food and water, people came crawling out of these buildings like ants out of an anthill. This is happening today, folks. The city is surrounded by warring factions, the government against all these other groups that are warring against them. They're trapped in the city, they can't escape, and they're desperate, and they feel like they've been forgotten. This is happening today, and people are feeling the persecution at no fault of their own, other than the fact of being caught up in a conflict in Syria. But you can see the hundreds of people there flowing out of these buildings and line up for food and water. They have no electricity. They have no means to survive. They're just basically destitute. So what happens when a refugee flees their country? What happens to them? Where do they go? What happens to them? Well, there's actually an agency, next screen. There's actually an agency called the United Nations High Commission for Refugees that has the authority to provide resettlement services to refugees who have fled war-torn areas or persecution of other countries. So here's a few photos of some of our refugees that have been arrived in Spokane, have taken before they leave the refugee camp. These are some of the camps the UN has started. This is Maylaw Camp, where a lot of the Burmese Karen I was just talking about have resettled. It's right on the border of Thailand and Burma, and just a hilly jungle area where they build their homes, they build schools for their children, and they say the biggest threat that they have is that the Myanmar military comes up to the border region and mortars the refugee camp every 3 or 4 months. The Thai guards will just kind of turn their back and ignore it because they want to refuse they have a refugee problem. And so they all flee to the jungle till the mortaring gets over with. They go back and rebuild their homes, and there they wait, year after year. The average length of time that a refugee is in a refugee camp before getting an opportunity to go to a third country, the average length of time last year was 17 years. So many of these children have grown up in refugee camps. 17 years is the average length of time. Some more, some less. Next screen. This is a camp in Ethiopia where a lot of the Sudanese and Somalis have fled to. As you can see, it's just wooden structures covered with tarps. The ditch down the middle, you know what that is? That's their latrine area. This is what these kids are growing up and learning how they go to relieve themselves. My wife actually today is an English language development teacher in Spokane schools working with refugee children, and in elementary schools. And so consequently, if she knows a refugee is coming from a camp like this, one of the first things she does is takes their hand and walks into the lavatory and shows them how to use these facilities. You just don't go in the middle of the floor. You have to use these facilities here. And there's this box on the wall that you just kind of wave your hand in front of, and magically a paper towel comes out. And so all these things are brand new for them. The principal still reports that every recess he has to go run out and chase down kids that are peeing out behind the trees or the bushes or something too, because this is where they grew up. They know nothing other than this type of conditions that they grow up. And so they have learned, and they want to learn. They want to fit in. You know, they get the same peer pressure our kids do. So they want to be able to fit in, but there's a learning curve involved as well. Next screen. So this is a camp in Uganda where a lot of the Congolese have fled. In the last, all the attention that refugees have gotten in the news media over the last 9 months, it's nothing new to us because we've known this for years, that there's refugee crises around the world, and it isn't just Syria. There's a lot of places, like the Congo. The last 10 years, there's been 10 million Congolese flee their country due to the warring factions in that country. 10 million. That's the same number as the Holocaust in World War II. And yet this is where they end up, and you can see that it's just grass huts with tarps over the top. And there they live year after year. Next screen. Not all refugees are coming living in huts and things like that. Some are urban refugees. This is in Iraqis that are in Amman, Jordan. They're given old, abandoned concrete rooms in an apartment complex that have been abandoned, where they actually are forced to pay rent. They don't have any water or electricity, but there they live year after year waiting for an opportunity. This is a camp in a place you may have heard of before called Darfur. It's between southern Sudan and the country of Chad in northern Africa. I don't want you to think so much of the deplorable conditions that these people are living in since the early 90s. As much as I want you to think for a second, what would it take to place somebody that's been there for 17 years and put them on an airplane and fly them to Spokane, Washington? You think they might need a little bit of help? Think they might need someone to greet them at the airport with a smile in a language that they recognize, maybe with a hot meal of food that they recognize, because they probably didn't recognize the food on the airplane, which I don't recognize it either, so sometimes that's good. But that's actually what we're required to do, is provide a hot meal, something that they recognize. That's the job of World Relief. We get them set up in apartments, take them to medical appointments, get them registered for Social Security, help their kids register for school, get the parents in English language classes at Spokane Community College that provides English language instruction for refugees. Help them go through job training and help them work towards self-sufficiency. Help them get jobs. Our biggest department is employment. Helps them get jobs. Help them work in to become the same Americans as our forefathers. I would dare say, I don't know every one of you, but I dare say, but most all of us here, with a few exceptions, wouldn't be here today if one of our forefathers hadn't been welcomed in this country, coming from Europe, coming from Asia, wherever. This country opened their doors to them. They said in 1890, 5,000 immigrants arrived at New York every single day. And our country welcomed them. They didn't have paperwork. They didn't have to pass through foreign lines. We just said, you got here? Okay, welcome to America. Start your life over again. And we're the direct derivatives. We're the children of the children of the children. My wife's family came from Italy 3 generations ago. Her grandmother talks about how her father was fleeing for his life and told them they were going to the beach for a picnic. So they got ready to go to the beach for a picnic, and next time she thinks she knows is a little girl, she's on a boat. And 3 weeks later, landing at Ellis Island, New York. And our country welcomed them. And I got the privilege of marrying her great-granddaughter. What a country we have. Welcome these people. We're built of immigrants from other countries. And this is continuing today through our refugee resettlement program. Now, it's a little different today, which I'll get into the details in a minute, but that's the work of World Relief. Next screen. So this is a picture of the second largest refugee camp in the world today. It's called Zaatari. It's just inside the Jordanian border from Syria. It was built in 2012 for 20,000 refugees. Today it has over 100,000. I've actually talked to World Relief personnel who've been at this camp, and they say, Mark, the conditions are deplorable. The UN doesn't have enough money to feed the influx of refugees from Syria. And so people are surviving on less than half the calorie count to eat a balanced diet. There's thievery going on. There's not enough security to protect things. Wealthy Gulf Coast men are coming into the camp and offering huge dowries to marry 9 to 12-year-old girls. We call it sex trafficking in this country. They marry them, and the families are pressuring them to marry these men because, they're going to give us this much money, we'll be able to help ourselves, this will be an answer, and he's going to treat you like a princess, you have to do this. The girls are resistant to marrying somebody that's 40, 50 years old, but nonetheless they're pressured into it. And as BBC did an extensive report of this, you can look it up on the internet, what happens in more cases than not is the man marry them for 2 weeks to a month and then divorce them and throws them back in the camp again. So in that culture, if a little girl gets divorced by a man, It's always the girl's fault, right? What did you do wrong? What did you do to cause this man to divorce you? Well, all he was interested in is just raping them for a couple of weeks and throws them back in the camp. So a lot of times they're stigmatized. A lot of times their families will reject them. They're soiled. So they really have no hope of ever marrying again. So there's increasing bands of these 9 to 12-year-old girls going through the camp that have lost their family and lost their future. And humanitarian organizations like World Relief are setting up educational institutes to help educate these children because we recognize the only future for these girls and their culture is to be educated. But nonetheless, tragic situations. So I ask you, and pardon me if it seems like I'm getting on a little bit of a soapbox here, but I'm going to anyway. When people are living in deplorable conditions like this for 5, 6 years, and they hear news that there's countries in Western Europe that said, if you can get here and you qualify, we'll offer you asylum. That's why they're risking their life. Next slide. Here's just a map of some of the refugee countries around Syria that are welcoming these Syrian refugees. There's 7 million displaced within Syria. In Lebanon, 1.1 million. 1 out of every 5 people in Lebanon today is a Syrian refugee. It'd be like the entire country of Canada. You know that country north of us? It'd be like the entire country of Canada being displaced into America in the last 4 years. So that every 5th person you meet is a Canadian refugee. That's what it's like in these countries. And they're willing, next slide, willing to leave their country, cross a desert in Turkey, get on inflatable boats, float over to some island in Greece, and work their way up through Eastern Europe to get to some of these countries. Because staying in a refugee camp is no future. Now, if you ask them, and I've asked some of these Syrian refugees, I've said, what would be your first option? To a man, to a woman, they'd say to go back to our home, our beautiful country of Syria. But they know that that's really not possible. They expect the war to continue for another 10, 15 years. And they hear that maybe if they get to Western Europe, they could actually have a future to give to their children. That's why you're seeing this huge migration. 9 months ago, 1st of September, a picture that galvanized the world of a Turkish soldier picking up a dead little Syrian boy that washed up on the beach. Many have seen the photo. That's caused a wealth and a tidal wave of compassion around the world towards the refugee problem, which is the greatest refugee crisis that this world has seen since World War II. Let's take Germany, for example. Germany's smaller in size than the state of Montana. I actually have 2 sons that live in Germany. They're both Army officers. They're stationed in Germany right now. And I say to them, what's the reaction of Germany? Because in the last year alone, Germany's received 1.2 million refugees, mainly Syrian, into their country. 1.2 million. So what's the reaction? And they said, well, everybody we've met are going, oh, this is the least we can do. These people are fleeing for their lives. Of course we would offer them an opportunity for resettlement here. People are moving out in apartments into families so that refugees can have apartments. The few churches that are in Germany, because it's mainly a secular society, are overwhelmed with the interest from the Syrians of understanding the love that they're able to show to them. They said that we watched Germans go to the train stations and the bus stations with signs saying, we welcome refugees. Little German kids bringing toys to share with the Syrian children. An overwhelming response. Yes, there is a small segment of society that's xenophobic, that's saying, no, we can't have these people here. And that's where the news media tries to balance their reporting by finding out these people. But for the most part, the latest poll in Germany showed 94% of the population is supportive of their policy of welcoming these refugees. We have France, 2 weeks after the Paris bombings, said, we'll up the quota to another 60,000 to allow more people into our country. England, not the UK, but England itself, it's actually smaller in size than the state of Idaho. They said, we see a lot of orphans. Of course, the BBC did this big report on sex trafficking of little girls in the area. It galvanized the country. And they said, we'll open our borders to 600,000 children and put them in foster homes in our country to help these children have a future. Canada, they just elected a new prime minister last fall. And he said, we will take up to 25,000 Syrians in a year. And we'll fly them directly from the camp to Ottawa and Toronto and Calgary and Vancouver. And the very first plane full of 260 Syrians that landed in Ottawa, their brand new prime minister went to the airport and publicly welcomed every single Syrian getting off the plane. So, I'm still on my soapbox here. Our president says, we'll take up to 10,000. And what does this country, who's made up of immigrants from around the world, react? Oh, no! We can't bring these people into this country. What if they're terrorists? Well, no, they're Muslim. What are we going to do? Well, I don't think I need to share with you my view on that. But let me just say that World Relief sees this as a huge answer to prayer. We believe God is in this. These people who never would have ever had an opportunity to hear the gospel, never would have an opportunity to see what the true church is about, are coming here. And there's an opportunity for the churches in Spokane, Washington, to rise up and do what we believe the church does best, and that's show the love of Jesus to those that need it the most, those that have been suffered and fleeing trauma and war. They finally come to peace here, and there's an opportunity for the church to really engage with these people because they're so interested. They're so wide open. We have Muslims from Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan coming, and they tell me, they say, Mark, you know, Jesus came to me in a vision or in a dream, and he told me that he'll show my way back to God when I get to America. You want to know how God's answering that prayer? He's answering it through the church. And not every church is supportive of this. There's a lot of fear out there. I recognize it. There's people that are genuinely fearful that the Muslims are going to come here and take over our government and enact Sharia law in our country. But we see it as an act of God. Because there's also Muslims are finding true peace in knowing Jesus as their Lord and Savior. You know, we as Christians have been praying for the Middle East for decades, saying, Lord, open up the opportunity for the gospel to go there. Open up opportunity for missionaries. And God said, you know what, I'm going to do one better for you. You know, I'm a lot smarter than you guys are, so I'll do one better. I'll bring them here. You don't have to learn their language. They have to learn English. And our churches are already built, and I'll put them in your neighborhood. Next slide. I like this posting that came up on Facebook a few weeks ago. So what to do if Syrian refugees relocate to your neighborhood? How about we bring them food and clothes and cooking utensils and hygiene items, books, toys, or shoes? This is probably what they need most, apart from your friendship. Then I like the tagline, you have a choice to be the Samaritan or some other guy. Don't be the other guy. He's not the hero of the story. What is the opportunity of the church? You know, Jesus, it says in Matthew 25, when he gave the situation where he's comparing the great judgment to a shepherd separating his goats from the sheep. Remember the story? Who did Jesus say would be highly blessed of the Father, and that God would be preparing a place in heaven for him since the foundation of the world? Who would get those two things? The person who feeds the hungry, gives drink to the thirsty, clothes the naked, welcomes the stranger or foreigner, and visits those that are in prison or those that are sick. That's the person that God promises highly blessed of the Father and prepared a place in heaven for. That's the opportunity that God's providing us for us today. But let's move on, because I have more information to be able to share with you today. So they go to another country. What happens to them then? They sit and they wait in a refugee camp, but if they can't go home, now 98% of the Albanian Muslims returned to Kosovo after the war. We helped do that. But in many cases, they wait and wait and wait, average of 17 years. So, next slide. Sometimes they're offered an opportunity to resettle in another country. And until this year, the United States has led the world in welcoming refugees. This year, we're falling far behind. So, next screen. How many refugees are in the world today living in camps like that? Anybody want to take a guess? Somebody say a number. 1 million. Okay. You really think there's that many? How many believe that's a number's high? How many think that number's low? Well, the lows get it, because actually, next one, there we go, 59.5 million people are displaced in the world today, or nearly 20 million are refugees that have left their country altogether. Or about the size of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, being displaced every single day. Now, regardless of what you hear on the media or what they like to focus on, 51% of refugees are children. And if you throw women in the mix, the number jumps to 75%. 75% are women and children fleeing for their lives. Syria alone, 4 million last year left their country. 4 million people, just from one country alone. Next slide. So, how many refugees are resettled in the U.S. annually? Well, actually, our Constitution grants the executive branch of our government the authority to set immigration policy. It has to be funded by Congress, but they set the immigration authority, which makes sense, otherwise you'd have 50 different immigration policies out there. So our president gets the authority from the Constitution to set how many refugees are admitted into this country every year. And every October, our president sets a determination or a ceiling of how many numbers come in. And in recent years, Obama has set that number around 70,000, which led the world until this year. This year, Obama set that number at 85,000, of which he said up to 10,000 can be from Syria. 85,000. You think, oh, that's a lot of people. Well, actually, what percentage of all refugees are admitted into the U.S.? Last year, that number is 0.5%. 0.5% of the refugees in the world today are ever getting an opportunity to be resettled in the United States. Very small number. Next slide. So how many refugees are resettled in Spokane? Well, we're authorized to resettle up to 600. Last year, we resettled 489. This year, probably about 550 or so. But with our economy and the jobs and stuff like that, the federal government, which it is a federal program, has said we can resettle up to 600 here. Now, in Spokane, World Relief is the only resettlement agency. Although Washington State has 5 different nonprofits resettling refugees, the other 5 are all over on the other side of the state. But World Relief has offices in Spokane, Tri-Cities, and in Kent. So we lead the state as far as resettling refugees. But nonetheless, here in Spokane, we have the support of the mayor. Mayor just had me in his office 2 weeks ago. Want to know what he can do to help support refugees in the city. Our city council is very supportive of it. Ben Stucker, the president of the city council, has met with me several times and been saying, just tell me what I can do to help what you're doing here. They want to add more diversity. So we got public support, school districts, the DSHS, a lot of organizations, a lot of service providers are part of the process, and they're very, very supportive of bringing refugees into this country because they see that they come with great values, great family values. They hit the ground running. They've been years in a refugee camp. They want to get their lives going again, want to provide for their children a better future than living in a refugee camp. So, next slide. Oh, okay, so what is the process of them getting here? Well, actually, refugees are classified into 3 different classifications. Individual, someone who can prove he has a refugee case. Now, actually, before I start talking about that, let me just say that the UN only refers 1% of all refugees to the U.S. refugee program because we have the most tightest standards of any other country in the world. So only about 1% of refugees have been referred to the U.S. program. And I just heard a report last week that 48% of those referred don't qualify through our vetting process, are rejected, or their applications are declined. So they're referred either through individual or a group referral, which means if you're from a village or an ethnic group that's been well documented, you were persecuted, you suffered genocide, then if you can prove you're part of that or have witnesses to show that you were part of that, you are qualified as a group. And in fact, most refugees come through this process. Then others are through family reunification. So if a refugee does get here, they can actually send for some of their close family members, and usually in a couple of years they're able to come here. We have a great story here that a couple of years ago we resettled 2 Congolese families that fled from the Congo years ago. And they, in the process of fleeing and the gunfire and mass genocide that was committed, they lost some of their children. They thought they just lost them in the process of fleeing. Well, the UN actually found them in another camp after they got here to Spokane. So these parents are frantic. They're found. Okay, what can we do to get here? So our legal department, World Relief, worked with our UN and our federal government to expedite their processing. And about 3 weeks ago, they landed at the Spokane airport with an escort. One family hadn't seen their children in 2 years. The other family hadn't seen these teenagers in 9 years. Thought they lost them. So what a joyous reunion. These kids came running down the ramp at the Spokane airport into the arms of their parents, crying, and they're African, and so they had lots of expression. They're jumping and crying, and it was just a glorious reunion. What a country we have that allows these parents to be able to be reunited with their children. We posted some pictures on Facebook. It had like 12,000 likes in 24 hours. It was just a glorious thing that we was able to allow these children. Imagine being separated, thinking you lost your children, and then for them to be found. How biblical is that? To be able to bring your children back together. That's what we see every week at Spokane. for unions like that. But back to this process. So they go through security checks. They have to be independently approved by 5 different federal agencies. They have to be vetted and security checked by the Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and the Counterterrorism Network. Independently. They have to prove that they have had no ties to any terrorist organization. But the truth is that refugees are the victims of the persecution. They're the ones that have been targeted by the terrorist groups and the Islamist groups. They're the ones that are fleeing the conflicts because they stand for peace. They're not the perpetrators of it. And if they pass all that, and again, less than 0.5%, and they get through all that, and they're fingerprinted with the Department of Homeland Security against this ever updated, and if they're approved, they go through medical screens, because there's certain infectious diseases we don't allow in this country. They go through cultural orientation, and then we here in Spokane get a bio of who the government wants to send to Spokane. A bio of everything about them. We have to assure that we can provide resettlement services here in Spokane. Well, they already know what groups work well here in Spokane, so they only send us those. But we get them every week. And then they start their travel documentation. Now, if they're from the Middle East, this whole process is enhanced. And if they're from the Middle East and their travel is for some reason delayed for more than 3 months, guess what? They drop out of the system and have to start all over again. Our State Department says that refugees are the most carefully vetted people ever to enter the borders of the United States. Well, there's other ways people get here. They get here, visitor visas, are they vetted at all? No. But refugees are coming here permanently. And they're the most carefully vetted people. And in the last 36 years, our country has welcomed 3 million refugees. And not one of them in 36 years have ever been convicted of any terrorist charges. Not even one. Pretty good record. So I get asked all the time, well, can you guarantee that none of these refugees are terrorists? No, of course not. But I think we've got a pretty good track record for 36 years. And I know these people because they're the ones that have been targeted. In fact, here's a little known fact. Back before the Iraqi war started, less than 10% of the population of Iraq were Christian, professed to be a Christian of some kind. In the last 10 years, 38% of the refugees from Iraq we've resettled in this country have been Christian. Why are they disproportionate? Because they're the ones that have been targeted by the Islamic groups. They're the ones that have been identified to be persecuted. So our country welcomes these refugees from around the world. And we continue to do that. Next screen. So as I said, there's other countries in the world that resettle refugees. England, Canada, countries in Europe, Australia, New Zealand all resettle refugees. And the United States is a country made up of immigrants from around the world. From the time that the Pilgrims arrived here and were welcomed by the Native Americans. Now, of course, we didn't treat them very well. In fact, there was a cartoon I saw last week about these Native Americans building a big wall right on the ocean saying, these foreigners from Europe, they're going to come here, they're not going to learn our language, they're going to change our customs. The same fears that we're hearing today. We had a presidential candidate that spoke in Spokane 2 weeks ago on a Saturday. And he said, quote, that Washington State is receiving thousands of Syrians and we don't know anything about them. You want to know the truth of the matter? The last year, Washington State received 24 Syrians. And we know more about them than we know about him. That's the truth of the matter. So, nonetheless, you can see I'm a little bit passionate about this subject. So, next screen. Here in Spokane, over the last couple of years, here's numbers of refugees received from the various countries. Iraq's been number 2, number from Burma. DRC is the Democratic Republic of Congo. And you can see the other ones. You don't see Syrians on that. They're kind of falling into the other. But yes, we received some Syrians lately. One school had me come and share with their faculty because they have a number of Syrians in their elementary school. And the teachers, as I told them the true story of how this country fled Dara and what they went through to be able to be processed and vetted to come to Spokane, Washington, the teachers were absolutely crying with tears because he said they would never guess that these sweet, sweet children in their classes came through all this trauma. She said, they're the best kids. I want them in my class. They're so cute, so beautiful. Next screen. So, we at World Relief Spokane, what do? Well, we have a lot of different programs. I have a staff of about 36. About a third of them are either former refugees or foreign-born. And we speak 25 different languages on staff, actually. But every one of them is a committed Christian. Every one of them sees their job not as a job, but as a ministry opportunity. Most of my hires in the last couple of years have been people that volunteered or interned with us, that actually love what we're doing so much that they actually want to work there. We generally have anywhere from 10 to 20 interns from Moody Bible Institute, from Whitworth, from Gonzaga, and even social work program at Eastern sends their social work people. WSU, their nursing program, sends their nursing interns to work with us. So we have a great opportunity to minister. And of course, anybody that volunteers or interns has to affirm our mission, vision, and values, which are very Christ-centered as well, to be able to have an opportunity to minister to these people. So, next screen. We have a number, most of what we do is refugee resettlement. We do some legal work. Refugees that are coming into this country, they come in legally, here permanently. After 1 year, they must apply for permanent residency, or what's called a green card. They have to have all their immunizations up to date, haven't broken any laws, and then they are allowed, after 5 years, to become citizens. Now, they have to be able to read, write English, understand and speak English. They have to memorize 100 civics questions, because the computer will randomly pick 10 to be able to quiz them on. And it's such a privilege. We had a person on staff from Bhutan that spent 18 years in a camp in Nepal before coming here with her children about 7 years ago. And after they were here 5 years, her husband became citizens. And she got up in our staff meeting, and with tears running down her eyes, she says, I'm 40 years old and never lived in a country that actually wanted me. I've been stateless for 40 years, my entire life. And I'm so thankful to America for giving me an opportunity to come here and become a citizen. They actually want me to be here. Of course, as she shared her testimony, we were all crying as well, but very, very moving to be able to see them finally have an opportunity to become citizens. So, next screen. This is some of the things that we do over the first 30 and 90 days of resettlement. We'd go through various different orientations. We help the children get into school, the parents get jobs. We help in a variety of different ways that we help the refugees do. And this is what we look to the church to help partner with us to be able to do this, because the State Department wants their communities they place refugees to be welcoming communities. And what makes World Relief unique is we look for our volunteers from the local churches. And that's what makes us a very, very Christ-centered situation. So, we do the work of resettlement out of compassion and love because we believe that every person is made in the image of God. Every person has intrinsic worth. And our nation, God bless America, provides and offers sanctuary to refugees to be able to replant their lives, just like they did to our forefathers. Next screen. So, what can you do? What can you do? Well, here's a couple different options. How about the first one? How about we as Christians pray? Pray for a peaceful end to the conflict that's creating refugees around the world. Pray that world leaders will be compassionate and apply to refugees. World leaders in our country as well, they would have compassion to these people and somehow stop this rhetoric about, no, we can't allow them in here. We just send them back. Send them back to what? Is a question I always have. We wouldn't be here. America opened the door to our forefathers. We really don't have a right to close the door behind us. I believe we want to continue to do this. Next screen. We have a Women Who Stand program. Some of these mothers, especially coming out of the Congo, may be becoming single with 2 or 3 young children. Some of them born of rape for the guards or the insurgents who were causing them to flee. But they're their children. Now, an American woman with small children by herself has a rough time in this culture surviving and going to work and getting her kids to school and buying groceries and all that goes into being a single parent. Can you imagine a refugee mother who doesn't speak the language and doesn't know the culture, doesn't have a driver's license, has to ride the bus, trying to make ends meet here? Well, that's why we're looking for groups of 3 or 4 Christian mothers to come along and just be friends to some of these mothers. Just help them understand how to do things and train them because they want to learn so much. They want to be able to be self-sufficient, but they just need a little bit of pushing in the right way. And what a ministry that it is to them. It's transformational. We see lives change daily. Not just the refugees, but the volunteers that volunteer with these people. They become best friends. Great opportunity for some of you mothers that might have some extra time to get together as a little team and be paired with a single refugee mother with small children. Next one. You can donate. We need to be able to raise funds to help supplement some of the programs that we have for refugees. Our government actually requires us to raise a certain amount of cash locally. And they say, we will unlock $2 every $1 that you get donated within your community. So if you donate 100, and then locks 2 more federal dollars at the refugee benefits by $300. Great program if you're interested in donating and supporting the work of the nonprofit World Relief. Next one. You can sign up. There's a great website that World Relief, World Vision, Sojourners, a number of Christian organizations have developed called WeWelcomeRefugees.com. Has videos, it has up-to-date information, has accurate information of the refugee crisis happening around the world. A lot more details than what I shared today. Great website. Next one. You can provide a welcome kit. Welcome kits are little tubs that you put together for a family of 4. With small items like toothpaste and kitchenware and towels and washcloths and maybe a few toys for the kids that churches do. We've had so much interest in the community. There was a church last week from Billings, Montana that contacted me a couple months ago and said, can you send Syrian refugees to our city? We want to help them. I said, no, sorry, I can't send them that far away. You're 550 miles away, but you can provide some welcome kits. So their church put together 40 welcome kits, rented a U-Haul, and drove it to Spokane to deliver to our office a couple weeks ago. There's a church last Friday from Moscow, Idaho, has filled up 2 vans full of welcome kits and brought them here as well. They want to be part. They want to help. And although we can't put refugees that far away, they want to do something. So welcome kits is a great way for a church for having a project. Organize a good neighbor team. This is a great opportunity for a church group of, say, 6 to 10 that wants to walk through the entire process from beginning at the airport for the first 6 months with a refugee family. We had a Somali family of 11 that came, a mother and 10 children that a good neighbor team at Life Center North came alongside and is walking. It's been transformational for the team, transformational for the family. We had to put them in a house, and it was just a great opportunity for this team to be able to walk through it. And sometimes good neighbor teams want to focus on something. Maybe it's a group of people that have time on their hands during the day that wants to drive refugees to appointments, or they want to be airport arrival, help refugees get settled in their new home and apartment, and explain all the things like thermostats and toilets, and you know, they could probably cook you a 3-course meal over a campfire, but give them a stove, an oven, a microwave, and what do I do with this? So just doing the basic things of helping get started. Great ways for a community, a church group, to be able to really be engaged with the refugee. And then you become lifelong friends as well. I know I'm running out of time, but advocate. Obviously, we need advocation with our senators, our congressmen, presidential candidates to be open to the fact of continuing the refugee resettlement programs we have in this country. We also have what's called a refugee simulation, which all the teachers in Spokane School District that have refugee in their classrooms must take this. It's a 3-hour simulation where you actually role-play the role of a real refugee that was resettled in Spokane. And you were role-playing fleeing from the conflict and being in a refugee camp and applying for freedom in the U.S. They take on their name, they dress like them, they go through different types of interview stations and things. And you know, it's one thing to read about refugees, but to actually feel what they're feeling is absolutely transformational. But we also offer this to churches. So if a church group or a youth group wants to have like a 3-hour mission experience, here's an opportunity to really have an experience like that through our simulation program. So in the end, I would say that World Relief, we stand for the vulnerable. Why? Because we believe it's God's call in our hearts. And we challenge the church in Spokane, and even the Gathering House, to see what God may be speaking to your heart. We realize this isn't for everybody, but if you've got a heart to be able to serve and show the love of Jesus, we ask you to prayerfully consider what opportunities that you might be able to partner with World Relief.